You're watching CGTV, Community Government Television, Channel 11, Pitkin County, City of Aspen, and Town of Snowmass Village.
Hello, my name is Randy Hampton from the Colorado Division of Wildlife. Thanks for taking some time out of your schedule today as we talk about black bears in Colorado's mountain communities. Black bears are a significant challenge for the Colorado Division of Wildlife in terms of management and some of the things we're starting to encounter more and more in Colorado's mountain communities. We're going to talk about black bears today, both about those management challenges and a little bit about the biology of black bears. Hopefully it'll help you understand a little bit more about this magnificent and fascinating creature. Let's jump in and start talking about some of the things that we deal with when it comes to black bears. When we talk about black bears, conflict is a significant challenge. Black bears in their natural environment typically don't present many challenges for the Division of Wildlife or for people. But when black bears begin to interact with people in communities, that's where we see significant challenges. We'll help to try and understand that a little bit more today and try and get a better understanding of these creatures in their natural environment as well. To do that, let's start out by talking about some black bear biology. This is the black bear, Ursus americanus, found in Colorado. Black bears, though they're called black bears, come in a number of different colors in their natural environment. You may find them in a black, almost a blue color in some bears, ranging down to a blonder color, or what some people call honey bears. You'll also see a standard black bear. You may see bears that have a red coat or bears in a brown color. Now, just because it's a brown colored bear doesn't make it a brown bear. It's still a black bear. Black bears are what we have in Colorado. This is a Kermode black bear. It's actually a white color phase bear. It's not found in the 48 lower states and not found in Colorado. So you typically won't see a white or a Kermode color bear that is a black bear in Colorado, but it does occur in nature. In terms of size, bears tend to average about 4.5 to 6.5 feet long, a standard black bear in Colorado. The average is 200 to 250 pounds. We have seen larger bears than that. Over 500 is extremely rare. But in 2007, we did have a roadkill bear that was killed by a car on Interstate 70, and that bear was 740 pounds, which may very well be a state record. It's incredibly infrequent to see a bear that large. If we talk about where bears like to live in terms of habitat, some of the things we look at is bear habitat and the natural range of bears can be very diverse in the lower 48 states. From the deserts of Arizona to the tundra plains of Alaska, black bears are very adaptable. But they prefer those montane shrublands and subalpine forests. Now, what does that mean to you and I? Well, when you talk about montane shrublands and subalpine forests, black bears aren't the only ones that prefer that. People prefer that too. And if you notice on the screen in the upper right-hand corner, that's some montane shrubland habitat that's good black bear habitat, but it's also where you see some homes in that particular picture. So we kind of like as people to occupy the same places that black bears like to occupy. Bears are looking for the same things that people are in terms of finding a place to live. They're looking for some place that provides shelter, water, and food. For food, when it comes to black bears are they're kind of like goats. They will eat a lot of different things. They'll eat anything. But they have a preference. And in the natural environment, that preference is berries and acorns. In the montane shrublands, the subalpine forests, you'll find serviceberry, chokecherry, oak brush with acorns. And that's pretty much the food of choice in the natural environment for black bears. In the springtime, when they come out of hibernation, bears will also eat a lot of grasses to start to bring their system up to speed before they do any heavy eating. They'll also eat insects rodents, so they do get some meat in their diet. In the natural environment, the black bear's diet is mostly vegetarian, but they do about 10% of that diet can consist of meat. They will eat small animals, situations where they will take elk calves, deer fawns, or may take cows or young sheep in a ranching environment. So they do eat some meat. About 10% of that diet, though, in the natural environment. They also will eat carrion, dead animals that they may come across, whether that be roadkill or some other kind of food. So those are the foods that black bears are looking for, at least in their natural environment. Let's talk about some of the yearly stages of a black bear. What's their year like? If you look at the graph on the screen, you notice that January, right there top dead center, is a period bears are in hibernation. By about April or May, those bears are leaving hibernation, sometimes early June at some higher elevations. And they enter a period called post-hibernation. This is a period where they're just really trying to wake up their system. When a bear's hibernating, it goes sometimes up to 200 days without eating, drinking, without defecating, without urinating. Bears slow their body function down. Their metabolism and their heart rate drops about 50%. So they really don't have a lot of normal body function going on during that hibernation period. So post-hibernation is the period when they're really trying to warm back up. Bears, by the way, in hibernation, a lot of people think that bears that are hibernating are very sound asleep. But the bear's body temperature only drops about 7 degrees Celsius during this period of hibernation. So their body temperature stays up. They can actually awaken quite quickly if there's a disturbance in the den. And so that's something that most people don't understand about bears. That post-hibernation period is really only 2 or 3 weeks. They don't eat a lot of food. They don't drink a lot of water. They're really just slowly allowing their system to warm up. Bears will hit that normal summer activity phase. They're looking for those high sugar, high starch plant foods, those berries, those acorns, those kinds of things throughout the summer. And then they really, in the fall, September, late September, October, bears kind of get a signal from Mother Nature that they need to start bulking up. They need to fatten up and get ready for winter. This puts bears into a period known as hyperphagia. Hyperphagia is a period where bears really are driven by the need to eat. They're consuming about 20,000 calories a day. They're eating 20 out of 24 hours a day. All that's on their mind during that period of time is finding food to eat, to fatten up. And then by mid-October, we see sows and cubs, sows, female bears, and cubs start to enter the denning period. A boar, a male bear, may enter the den in mid-November or sometimes into December if food supplies are available. So what about those dens? What do they look like? Well, they're generally rock overhangs, small caves. We find about 60% of the bears in Colorado that den in some studies are denning in rocky areas. But sometimes a den may not be as sophisticated as a cave or a rocky area. It may be under a tree. In the right lower corner of the screen, you'll see a tree where a bear has denned under that tree. Generally, the snow will cover those lower branches and provide a nice area for the bear and provide some seclusion. But that's what those dens generally look like. Black bears are fascinating in terms of reproduction. It's probably one of the most adapted processes that the black bear has for living in the world. Bears breed during the summer. Mid-June through about mid-August is when bears breed. But bears have interesting characteristics. They have delayed embryo implantation, meaning that even though they breed in mid-June to mid-August, that embryo doesn't implant itself. It doesn't implant in the uterine walls of the bear until the bear goes into hibernation. And then the bear is able to determine whether it's healthy enough to support a cub and to make it through the winter months. And so bears are trying to figure out if they're capable, healthy enough to survive, and the biology figures that out for them. If the bear is healthy, if it enters the den healthy and has plenty of fat resources to support a cub, then that embryo actually implants. The cubs themselves are born between January and February. The average litter is about 2 cubs in Colorado. At birth, the cubs themselves are about a ½ pound. They're hairless and they're blind, but they begin to grow very quickly in the den with the mother, with the sow bear. Those cubs will emerge from the den in the springtime with the sow, and they will stay with that sow all of the first year. Throughout that first year, as the cubs grow, they're with the sow. They then will re-enter the den in the fall of their first year with the sow. They spend that entire next winter. Then in the spring, when the sow leaves the den, that 1.5-year-old bear will leave the den and then will disperse, look for its own territory, and move out. A male bear will start to find its own territory. A female bear will try and establish some territory where that they can begin to live their lives without that sow. That sow then will be able to begin the process of producing additional cubs in that summer when that cub is away. There are about 8,000 to 12,000 black bears in Colorado. The Division of Wildlife estimates that there are about 8,000 to 12,000. We need to talk real quickly about grizzly bears, though. There are no grizzly bears in Colorado. There once were grizzly bears in Colorado, but there are no longer believed to be any living grizzly bears in Colorado. That's an important distinction to make. Black bears are typically much less aggressive than their larger cousins, the grizzly bear. Grizzly bears do tend to be more aggressive towards people, towards other animals, and all of those things. And black bears not quite as aggressive. There's some distinctions, some things that, if you spot bears, help determine the difference between black bears, grizzly bears. One is a large hump that's on the shoulder area of grizzly bears. They have a large hair hump on that shoulder region. Black bears do not have as large and pronounced a hump in the environment. Now, large black bears, when they get into that 500-pound plus, may start to take on a little of those boxier, bigger characteristics. But certainly there's other ways to tell grizzly bears from black bears. Grizzly bears have a dish-shaped face, whereas a black bear's face is much more flat. Also, the claws are one of the easiest ways to tell. Grizzly bears have very long, pronounced front claws. If we go back to that other picture and take a look at the claws on that bear, that's obviously a grizzly bear with very long, pronounced claws. Black bears don't have claws that stick out that far unless they're using them. And then they tend to come out longer. But in walking around or in the natural environment, grizzly bears' claws are extended much further, so they have much stronger, bigger claws. So those are some of the things that help distinguish between black bears and grizzly bears. One of the other things you can look at is the ears on black bears. Black bear ears tend to be more pronounced and stick out more, whereas a grizzly bear's ears tend to be smaller in comparison to the head, closer to the head. Black bear's ears will stick up a lot more. The black bear enjoying an apple. So those are some of the biological things that hopefully help people understand a little about the biology of bears. And that's the stuff that the Colorado Division of Wildlife is really very good at. We've been studying bears in their natural environment for dozens of years, to the point that we've been in their dens. We know all there is to know, hopefully, about black bears in their natural environment. We'll still keep looking to learn things, but we have a great deal of knowledge, a great deal of science out there. When it comes to bears in people's environment, or people in bears' environment, that interaction, that's where we know less about bears. I want to talk a little bit about conflict, and we're going to talk about some of the things we're doing to learn more about black bears in urban environment, and some of the things that we're trying to do in order to work out conflict. Let's take a look right now at what is conflict. When we say conflict, what does that mean to people? Is it an attack? Certainly something that most people would think is some bear conflict, a bear attack. What about an encounter? You're hiking down a trail, you come across a bear. The bear walks in front of you, maybe gives a bluff charge. For some people, Those are very scary experiences, especially if you're not used to living around bears. And so an encounter might be something that some people would think of as conflict. What about a sighting? If you're not from a bear area and you wake up one morning and there's a bear in your backyard, is that conflict? What about game damage? Game damage, the Colorado Division of Wildlife pays for agricultural damage caused by wildlife. Bears are one of the top damage-causing animals in terms of damage to agricultural products, whether that be crops, livestock kills, things like sheep, cattle, things like that, or beehives, which are commonly raided by bears. About property damage. Now, the Colorado Division of Wildlife does not pay for property damage caused by bears. That's generally held on people's home insurance policies. But if we take a look, you can see in the upper right-hand corner a kitchen that's been visited by a bear. And bears are not very good at opening drawers or going through refrigerators. They typically are looking for the food, and they'll get to it any way they can. Those drawers probably won't close again and have to be replaced because bears typically will pull them out. And then once they figure out they can climb up on those to get to the higher cupboards, they'll do that too. And drawers in your kitchen probably weren't made to support a 250-pound bear. So bears can do a lot of damage, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in damage sometimes when bears enter homes. The automobile in the lower left-hand corner, that's going to be somebody that'll probably be driving to the local salvage yard looking for a replacement seat. You can see that seat is completely torn away. Every time you drive through the drive-thru, you go to McDonald's, you go to Burger King, you go to Wendy's, and you drive through and you grab that bag of food and you put it in the car, all those scents that you smell, you know, you're driving back to where you're going to eat those fries, and you think, oh, that smells really good, and you start eating the fries right away. Well, that smell of those French fries stays in your upholstery in your car, and bears can smell that. So you get damage like that where the bear actually goes in and virtually eats an entire seat looking for those food smells that have soaked into that upholstery. So those are some kinds of conflict that we see, but the official definition of conflict is anything that requires the action of the Division of Wildlife or the USDA, Animal Plant Health Information Systems, Wildlife Services branch, the folks that deal with agricultural damage along with the Division of Wildlife. Anything that requires action or action of a landowner to remove a bear, move a bear, chase a bear off, do anything like that, or potentially to kill a bear in situations where that's warranted. So that's the official definition of conflict, but let's take a closer look at that and see how it affects those of us that live in mountain communities in Colorado. When we start to talk about the causes of conflict, shrinking habitat is an absolute key to this equation. Now let's think of it on a number of different scales, but let's start by talking about the number of people that live in Colorado. As you can see from the chart on the screen, the latest estimates of the population of Colorado really put it at about 4.5 million people. But by 2020, the population of Colorado will be over 6 million people, and over 7 million people by 2030. So the population of Colorado is rapidly growing. All of those people have to live somewhere, and that means more homes, more stores, all those things that go along with that population growth. And that population growth, especially in mountain communities, is beginning to impact more and more bear habitat. If you take a look at valley communities, communities like Aspen, Vail, Steamboat Springs, that are developed in those valley floors, as those communities have grown, even within the last 10 years, development has begun to sprout on the mountainsides. The valley floor communities are moving onto the sides of those mountains in the river valleys. Well, the bear problems may have been small and isolated years ago when the communities were just on the valley floor. As we see development starting to occur up the sides of the mountains, up the sides of those hills, we see more bear conflict. That's because the sides of those hills is typically the area where the service berries grow, and typically the area is called the transition zone, where bears are most commonly found. And so as a home moves into that area, it may not be the person in that home that has a bear problem, but somewhere in the town where a bear's been displaced and now it's looking for someplace else to call its territory. That bear may end up in an area where people say, I've lived here all my life, we've never had bear problems, and now we do. So development can not only affect the people that are building in those areas, but affect other people. Let's talk about shrinking habitat on two other fronts as well, because it's important to understand some of the other challenges that bears are facing. How many people out there watching today have a favorite fishing hole, someplace they've gone for years and years and years? You go, you fish, you love it, there's nobody else there, and then one day you go there and there's another person, and another person, and another person. And you go to these places and all of a sudden you find out that your favorite place, the place that you used to go, is now crowded. It's got a lot of people. And we see that recreational use on the rise. Maroon bells near Aspen is a great example. Maroon bells was becoming so loved and so used that the U.S. Forest Service had to back everybody off and make some restrictions. And now when you go to Maroon bells, you ride a bus and there's a control on the number of people that can go into those areas. And that's just because we're using more and more of that recreational land. And more of that recreational use causes disturbance for black bears. Now when we look at that loss of habitat, there's one other factor that we need to take a look at, and that other factor is energy development in western Colorado. Anyone who's driven around the Rifle, Meeker, Grand Junction area knows that energy development is moving full scale. That disturbance that's caused, all those extra roads, all those extra well pads, has an effect on wildlife, a dispersal effect in some cases, where bears may leave areas because there's more traffic, there's more things going on. So there's all kinds of factors that are causing a shrinking habitat issue for bears, and hopefully that tries to explain it. Let's take a look at some of the other challenges that we face, though, that cause conflict. Now, I don't want to try and act like I'm a climatologist or get into a great debate about global warming, whether it exists, whether it's man-caused, all of those things. But we are going to talk about it in terms of bears, just in case those people out there that say that global warming is occurring and may be human-caused, just in case, so that we can see what kind of impact that's going to have. To have that discussion, we have to have a discussion of weather, because weather is just those local events that deal so much, those short-term local events that deal so much with bears in individual situations. For example, in drought years, years that we have significant droughts, and in years where we also have a late frost, a killing frost. In 2007, a killing frost, June 17th, moves through, knocks out the berry population. Well, that's what those bears eat. Reduces the acorn population because of drought. So we have those weather issues that start to affect what the bears have to eat. From a climate perspective, what the climatologists tell us and what we are concerned about is the fact that global climate change is going to mean those drought conditions, those late frosts, all of those things that impact bears' natural food sources, those things are going to happen more frequently. And because of that, we have concerns about bears and certainly the potential for those weather-related, those climate-related issues that create challenges for dealing with bears and people. So weather and climate is certainly something that affects bears, but it's something that we don't have too much control over at the Colorado Division of Wildlife. The biggest cause of conflict, the one thing that we really can look at and say we can make a difference in this area, we can make a difference for bears, is human food sources. Unfortunately, human food is readily available for bears, and it creates some significant problems. When we bring bears into close proximity with people, that's where we face some risks. Take a look at an overflowing trash dumpster, and those are too common in mountain communities in Colorado. As you walk around many of these mountain communities, it's a common sight, and hopefully people can help, you can help us deal with that situation. So let's talk about human food sources here in a little while. But let's bring up one other thing that some people point to as a cause of conflict. In 1992, Colorado voters eliminated Colorado's spring bear hunting season. Some people say that because of the loss of the spring bear hunt, there's now more bears out there, and that's impacted populations. Let's just take a quick look at harvest numbers, and if you look at the graph on the screen, those are the harvest numbers from bear hunters each year. And you can see when the spring bear hunt was in existence up until 1992, and then to today, we have a fairly consistent harvest of bears. That particular harvest has stayed fairly constant by moving that harvest into the fall in order to maintain a healthy bear population. Without bear harvest, there would certainly be too many bears, and these conflicts would rise exponentially each year. So in order to keep that bear harvest at a healthy level, the Colorado Division of Wildlife has been able to modify the hunting season to make sure that that fall harvest was still consistently making sure that the populations were good. When it comes to conflict resolution, the public often believes if there's bears in communities, it's a bear problem. But is it a bear problem or is it a people problem? Let's take a look at some of the challenges that we face when we respond to some of these calls. This call, for example, a bear tried to get into my house. Well, if you take a look at that window, there's a bird feeder hanging right above it. Sweet sugar water. Sugar water. The window is open, so the smells of the food that's being cooked in the home comes right out that window. And there's also a log pile right underneath the window that the bear can climb up on and make it just that much easier to get into the window. Those are things that people can take care of that can make a difference for bears. Or a call, gee, there's a bear outside my window. I went to go outside and there's a big bear standing there. Well, if you take a look, there's some dog food sitting right there on that patio. And that would be something that would attract bears to that area. So certainly feeding your pets indoors is one way that people can make a difference. There's a bear on my deck. And if you look really closely at that photo, the bear is just leaving. It's on the far end of the deck, a little fuzzy. Sorry, it was moving fast. But you can take a look at the garbage strewn around the deck. Also right there next to the barbecue grill. Trash, barbecue grills, some other attractants, things that are bringing bears to that area. And the question is, why won't the DOW do something? Well, the Colorado Division of Wildlife really can't do anything to prevent a bear from coming in when you're attracting it with things like trash and barbecue grills. But you can make a difference in those situations. We'll talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what the DOW can do and does do in response to conflict. Historically, the Colorado Division of Wildlife would respond to bears infrequently. In the West, people generally took care of a lot of their own problems. And so it wasn't that uncommon for a landowner to kill a bear that may have been causing problems. But that system really wasn't very good management in itself. We also had some inconsistencies in how the Division of Wildlife would deal with bears. District wildlife managers were making decisions on a case-by-case basis to determine what was best in a given situation. Some district wildlife managers put down a lot of bears. Other district wildlife managers would move bears 7 or 8 times. So it was necessary for the Division of Wildlife to come up with a consistent management guideline that would help people understand how we respond. What the Division of Wildlife developed was a two-strike policy for bears. This gave us consistent application statewide of a policy for dealing with bears. The two-strike policy basically says that if a bear is causing a problem, if a bear is a nuisance bear, raiding trash cans, doing things, getting into areas where there are a lot of people and that potential for conflict is high, the Division of Wildlife has the ability to relocate that bear. We'll trap the bear, tag the bear, relocate it to an area generally 50 miles or more from the area where it's trapped. In doing that, we give the bear every opportunity to take advantage of natural food sources, to not rely on people and the food that, unfortunately, people have become too quick to supply. So we give the bear the opportunity. When the bear returns, if the bear returns to a community and begins to cause nuisance problems again, that's a bear that is not capable of living on natural food supplies, not capable of doing bear things, and has become too dependent on human food sources. Bears that become too dependent on human food sources spend too much time in areas where people are located, and that's where we generally see problems and where we can begin to see aggressive bear behavior towards people. So for public safety, it's not something that the Division of Wildlife can tolerate. So a bear's given that one opportunity. If the bear returns, the bear is put down under the two-strike policy. Now it's important to note, the two-strike policy is a nuisance policy. It is not a dangerous bear policy. That means a bear that's being a nuisance, trash, getting into pet food, raiding barbecue grills, maybe visiting campgrounds, those kinds of things, is a nuisance bear, and that bear can be moved under the policy. But a bear that's breaking into homes or behaving aggressively towards people is a dangerous bear. And dangerous bears are put down, not necessarily having to have that first strike. So bears that behave aggressively towards people are put down in Colorado. But long before we get to the point of the two-strike policy, the Colorado Division of Wildlife makes every attempt to educate people, to talk with people, to do programs like the one you're watching today, to try to give bears every opportunity and to try to give people the skills, the knowledge, and the tools to make sure that they're not causing problems or attracting bears to communities. Our Bear Aware program is one of those ways. Volunteers that go out and help educate their neighbors about things that people can do. Some of those trash and those issues. There's education about that. We have a brochure called Living with Wildlife in Bear Country that is available from any Colorado Division of Wildlife office. If you can't make it into the office, you can call the Colorado Division of Wildlife. We'll mail you a brochure. It's got great tips on how to make your home bear-proof and some tips on what to do if you encounter bears in the wild, whether you're hiking or camping. All of that information is available. We work extensively with the media throughout Colorado to try to get the message out to people that may be visiting Colorado, to try to get the message out to them, letting them know what's going on with bears and what kinds of things they can do to prevent problems. Our district wildlife managers also consult with property owners. If you have a bear problem on your property, you can contact the Colorado Division of Wildlife. We can come out, take a look around, see what may be some of the things that contribute to those bear situations. Now, we do a lot to educate people, but can you educate bears? It's an important question. There are some ways that we can try to educate bears, some deterrents, some aversive conditioning techniques that the Division of Wildlife has available and certainly can work with property owners in situations where it's appropriate. For example, rubber buckshot fired from a shotgun doesn't do damage, but will certainly bruise a bear and make that bear aware of the fact that it doesn't want to be in an area. We want bears to be uncomfortable around people. We don't want bears to be comfortable in the communities in Colorado. We want those bears to be very comfortable in the surrounding wildlands. Pepper spray, auto sprayers. In the photo you see an auto sprayer that's actually next to a trash can enclosure. The auto sprayer is baited. Our officers will use something like cantaloupe, salmon, chocolate sauce, and they'll bait that sprayer. The goal is to get that bear that's visiting that trash can, to get that bear to hit that bait, and the pepper spray that's in that device then sprays the bear. Not very comfortable for the bear. People might say, well, gee, that's mean. Well, the reality is, what's meaner? You know, trying to do those things to discourage that kind of behavior from bears, or ending up in a situation where we end up putting a bear down. Once again, it's very important that bears feel uncomfortable in these urban environments. One of our bear researchers recommended for a long time that people in towns where bear encounters are common put baseballs in a bucket, make a bucket of baseballs on their patio. Every time a bear comes in their yard, throw the baseballs and hit the bear. Now, none of us are Nolan Ryan or Roger Clemens. We're not going to toss a 100-mile-an-hour fastball out there. And nothing that's going to do damage to that bear. But we want them to not want to be around people. We want them to associate that with bad things. Lots of other things that communities and other people have tried, systems that automatically turn on sprinklers and discourage bears. Noisemakers, there's some evidence that bears adjust to noisemakers and maybe get used to those. Electric fencing is a very good deterrent for bears. We see that being utilized in campgrounds at Banff. Town of Lake Louise is considering actually running electric fencing all the way around that community. And so Electric fencing is a good deterrent, and we use that a lot with beehives and places like that where bear visits are frequent. So that's some tips and some tools that landowners can use if they have a situation where bears are visiting frequently. What are we trying to avoid? Why would we want to do these things? What are we trying to avoid? Well, we're trying to avoid putting bears down, but how do we get to that point? Well, the first thing is this progressive behavior. It starts out as a bear that may visit a trash can. And everybody I know looks at that picture of that little bear trying to get in that dumpster. And the bear did get into the dumpster, by the way. He climbed up on top and managed to fall down in between the two rubber doors there. But we're trying to get from a place where that is common to what the next stages are. And you look at that and you go, isn't that cute? And a little bear. Well, we look at that picture and we say, isn't that tragic, that bear that's there for those human food sources? That bear might turn into a bear that would go into a home, maybe through an open window. That's generally the first way. Somebody at home, they cook dinner, it's a beautiful spring evening, and they leave the door open and have the screen door closed, and they think about closing the screen door to keep the flies out, but they won't think about closing the door to keep the bear out. Don't ask how that works sometimes, but it's a nice spring night. You want to let some fresh air in, so you may go off to the movies, or you decide to walk to the ice cream parlor with the kids or the grandkids, and you leave the house open because having that fresh air cools it off so nicely. And that bear comes by that open window and smells that dinner you were cooking and would enjoy it just as much as you did. And so they go into that house through an open door, through an open window. Once those bears, though, get a feel for the fact that there is food in those big wooden boxes that we all call home, they're harder to deter from going into homes. In the photo that you see here, this is 2007 home in Aspen. And the photo is very small, but if you look closely enough, the deadbolt on that door is still locked. This was a bear that went through a locked door to get into a home. As we walked with our officers, I walked with our officers around this house to see if there was anything at this house that had attracted that bear. The homeowner had done everything right. There were ammonia balloons near some of the windows because the bears had been frequent visitors, at least walking through the yard. The homeowner wanted to discourage those bears from going through the window. So you take a balloon, you put some ammonia in there, about half and half with ammonia and water. You blow enough air in it to pressurize it. You hang it from a string by that window. If that bear's coming to that window, they'll break that balloon. They get that ammonia. It's uncomfortable. It's not good. They generally run off. They don't like it very much, but it discourages them from coming through that window. When bears reach the point that they're breaking into homes, you have a bear that now believes that that home is its territory, is the place that it's going to want to hang out. And that's a situation that becomes dangerous for people. You don't want to wake up in your living room when you fall asleep watching the movie at night. Wake up in the living room because there's a large bear standing there that thinks your house is its territory. Not a good situation. And it's certainly a situation that in the chain of progressive behavior leads to aggressive behavior and leads to a situation where the Division of Wildlife is going to have to act and put a bear down. So if we can prevent those things like bears visiting those trash cans, then we can have some control over, hopefully, not having to put as many bears down in those situations. Now, are bears stone cold killers? A lot of people are very terrified of bears, and sometimes the media, in an attempt to sensationalize some stories, will make it seem like those wild animals are killers. Well, 4 million people in the United States every year are injured by domestic dogs. 4 million people. 20 people are injured by black bears. So, in terms of risk, you're much more likely to be injured by your neighbor's dog than you are to be injured by a black bear, even in Colorado's mountain towns. In fact, you're 100 times more likely to be killed by a bee than you are to be killed by a black bear. And yet you don't see a lot of stories on the TV, you don't see a lot of newspaper stories that talk about those deadly killer bees that are making all of us terrified to go outside. So bears kind of get a bad rap. Since 1900, less than 50 people have been killed in North America by a black bear. Less than 50 since 1900. Of course, less than 15 of those were outside of Alaska and Canada. So in the lower 48 states, less than 15 people since 1900, more than 105 years ago, less than 15 people have been killed by black bears in the lower 48 states. But if they're not frequent killers, are they still dangerous? And the answer to that question has to be yes. They're large, powerful animals, and they are still dangerous. 2007 in Utah, most people had heard about the 11-year-old boy that was killed by a black bear. Tennessee in 2006, a 6-year-old girl was killed camping with her parents. New Mexico, a 93-year-old woman killed in her home when the bear entered her home and decided that it wanted to be there and she didn't need to be there. Bear killed the woman. A 5-month-old baby in New York in 2002 that was taken off a porch at a campground where people had been feeding bears because they thought it was great to get pictures with the bears. They thought it was great to bring bears close to them so they could see the bears, so they could show their friends the bears. And the bears became very comfortable in that environment. Now, it's not the people generally that are doing the feeding or the people that may be causing the problem that the bears go after. I think there'd be a sense of justice in it if the bears would only go after the people that were doing the things that are wrong. Unfortunately, when you visit a campground or when you go to a cabin or when you go out in the woods, you don't know what the people that were there before you were doing. And if they were feeding bears, that creates a risk to you in that environment. And so very, very, very critically important, never, ever, ever, ever feed a bear. A fed bear is a dead bear. Why is that? That's because they will behave aggressively, and the Colorado Division of Wildlife will put them down in those situations. So you can stop that cycle. Also a word of warning, it is illegal in Colorado to feed black bears or any other big game wildlife. And so you can be cited if it's found that you're feeding intentionally those animals. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what people and communities can do. As people, you can store your trash in your garage or in your shed and only put it out on the morning of pickup. Critically important, trash is probably the #1 attractant for bears. You can feed your pets indoors. Don't put that pet food outside. Take down bird feeders. In the fall, when the bears are the most hungry, and in the summer, when the bears are roaming around, there's plenty of natural food available for birds. So there's no point in having a bird feeder. Or if you want to put it out to enjoy birds during the middle of the day, take it down at night. Put it inside during the evening hours, dusk, dawn, and overnight when bears are more active. Clean your barbecue grill after you use it. Let that fire burn a little bit. Burn off some of the stuff that accumulates, those fats and greases that accumulate on the barbecue grill. You can also use an ammonia water mixture to spray down the grill and clean it really good after you use it if you can't store it indoors. If you've got a place in the garage or a shed to put it in, that's also a good idea. Pick the fruit when it ripens on your trees and pick it up off the ground if it falls on the ground. Fruit trees are a big attractant for bears. And critically important that people that have fruit trees take care of some of those by picking the fruit when it ripens on the tree. What else can you do? You can educate your neighbors and visitors. When you see them doing something that may be wrong in terms of bears, help them understand. It's great that you took the time to watch the program today, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they don't understand the risk they're causing for other people. So educate neighbors and certainly visitors to mountain communities about the challenges of living in black bear country responsibly. Support habitat protection and trash ordinances. Communities often struggle with passing ordinances regarding trash, and certainly decision makers struggle with making decisions about land use and those kinds of things. And so your elected officials need to know that it's important for you that habitat is protected as well, and that black bears are thought of in terms of making decisions about communities. What can communities do? Snowmass Village was the first community in the United States to develop a trash ordinance that was designed to protect bears and make sure that we didn't have a problem where bears ended up being put down. In Snowmass Village, it covers residential, commercial, and special events. Trash disposal was really the beginning of that Snowmass Village ordinance. Well, Aspen, Pitkin County, Vale, Eagle County, Steamboat Springs, all these other communities now have some kind of trash ordinance on the books. And it's important that those ordinances are enforced as well. So talk with your elected officials about making sure that there's strong enforcement of those ordinances, because they can make a difference for bears. Most of those ordinances have a requirement for wildlife resistant or wildlife proof containers, or may have some guidelines or regulations for when people can put trash out, when trash companies can pick up, and a number of other issues. And so that might be something to look into if your community doesn't have an ordinance, or if your community has an ordinance that's maybe not strong enough or enforced enough, and that's where people can make a difference. Take a look at some of those bear-proof, bear-resistant type containers. You can see enclosures that trash cans can be put into. You can see commercial dumpsters. There's another set of enclosures that large trash bins, dumpsters can be placed in. More of those, whether you wheel in trash cans. Those enclosures are very effective, very cost effective as well. And then when the trash person comes to pick it up, they can open it. Make sure you use round doorknobs if you're using doorknobs, not lever style doorknobs. Round doorknobs bears can't open, but lever doorknobs they can lean on and open. They learn how to do that. This is just something that's kind of, next time you're talking trivia with your friends, there is actually a place, it's in Idaho, where trash cans and manufacturers of trash cans send their trash cans to be tested so that they can be deemed bear-proof or bear-resistant. You can see these grizzly bears in the photo, and what they do is they spray some of those attractants into the trash can, some of that chocolate sauce, some of that kind of stuff, put that in the trash can, and then they close it up, seal it up, and the bears actually have to take an attempt to get in there. Based on how long it takes the bears to get into the trash can is whether that's going to be a wildlife resistant or a bear-proof, wildlife-proof container. And those bears get pretty darn good at getting into some of those containers. And so manufacturers are constantly challenged to find ways to make a trash can that's easy for the public to use, but difficult for bears to operate. Despite all of these efforts, all these community efforts, all of the education efforts that are out there, despite all of that stuff, the Colorado Division of Wildlife is dealing with conflict on the rise. And you can see in the graph that conflict calls to the Division of Wildlife continue to increase. Real quickly, let's talk real quick about why not feed bears. There have been people that have said, well, gee, if food's hard to find because of drought conditions or things like that, why can't the Colorado Division of Wildlife or some other group take and place feeding stations in the woods where bears can go and get food, and then they won't have to come to town? Well, there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to do that. First of all, you don't want to habituate bears to human food. You don't want bears to get to the point that they think that human food that you're dropping in the woods is just as sufficient as the natural food that they might find there. Additionally, bears that are already sitting in a dumpster because it's easy human food to find have no reason to go to the woods to look for food. And so until we take care of, as people, those easy to find human food sources, there's no incentive for bears to leave town. It's absolutely critical that people take care of those trash issues. By dropping food into the woods, you really feed the bears that are already in the woods. You feed the big ones that are doing the right thing, that have a place that they've marked out, and that's their territory. And they're in the woods doing the things you want them to do. Once again, those bears in town have really no reason to leave town and look in the woods for food, but those bears that are doing the right things are the ones that would be rewarded in that situation. Bears are not herd animals. Unlike deer and elk, which have been fed in critical winter times, bears aren't herd animals. They don't get along well with each other. They're not social animals. Generally, what happens is if you place food at feeding stations, Europe's tried it in some cases, and what they found is the big bears will sit on those feeding stations, have all the food they need, when other bears, smaller bears, that might be the more problematic bears, the ones that are in town, the younger bears, cubs and yearling bears, when they wander towards those areas, puts them in risk of being killed by larger bears. And so you end up baiting small bears into the big bears that'll kill those those smaller bears. And so bears aren't herd animals. They don't get along nicely with each other. They are mobile feeders as well. A bear may eat one place, then they'll go off to rest, and they'll wander, and they'll eat another place and another place, and after 3 or 4 days, they come back to those same locations every 2, 3, 4 days, and so that can be a little bit of a challenge. One of the biological reasons that it is a significant challenge is the fact that you can overinflate the bear population. You can get a situation where bears will have plenty of food. So what you have to do is bears will, remember we talked about black bear biology and those bears that can delay the implantation of those embryos. Well, if they go into the den and they're well fed, they're going to have more cubs. Whereas if they go into the den realizing that there may be a natural food shortage, then they're not going to have those cubs. And so by feeding bears, what you do is you make more bears. You end up with 4 or 5 years down the road doubling the bear population, and you've really made your problem that much worse. So there's a lot of good, sound biological reasons why feeding does not work and isn't really a good idea for bears at all. It may make people feel better, but it's biologically a really bad idea. Despite the best efforts of wildlife managers, though, that conflict is still on the rise. We continue to do things, but we continue to see increasing conflict. That's just a cool picture, so I threw it in there. There you see, look at that little tiny tree supporting that bear. Can you imagine? So what's the Colorado Division of Wildlife doing? Colorado Division of Wildlife is working with Colorado State University and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the National Wildlife Research Center, which is based in Fort Collins, part of the USDA, and working on a study of black bears in mountain towns. We're looking for good solutions. We're trying to determine that influence. How does urban growth affect bears behavior and ecology-wise? We're trying to evaluate the effectiveness of those management strategies that we use. Remember you saw the bear sprayer earlier that we use? Well, when we use a bear sprayer, how effective is it? Does the bear run away and go a block away and then cause a problem? Does it go a mile away? Does it go 5 miles away? Is it gone for a day? Is it gone for 10 minutes? Is it gone for good? Those are questions that the study that's occurring in the Aspen and Snowmass area is going to help us try to answer. We're also looking at how effective are some of our educational outreach opportunities. We're trying to determine the attitudes and knowledge that the public has towards bears, taking a look at some of those situations. Take a look, is it more effective to educate people or is it more effective to educate bears? Because we certainly want to devote our resources to what's most effective to protecting Colorado's black bear population. Part of the study is to capture bears, trap bears. Bears are tranquilized, brought out, they're weighed, and collars are placed on the bears. A lot of blood drawn, different medical tests run to try and determine everything we can about that particular bear. Collars are placed on the bears. There's a bear with a collar, Aspen bears in 2005. There's a number of these different bears. A Glenwood Springs bear, an adult male bear. In 2006, we started trapping bears. We captured 4 bears, all of them young males, a couple of those guys. One of them was from the previous year in the Aspen area. And we utilized GPS technology to try and develop that exact understanding of where these bears are. We use that GPS technology, GPS collars, every 15 minutes. We can overlay those GPS locations that we receive from those collars on things like community GIS mapping, and so we can tell exactly what dumpster a bear may be in and know where it's been when it's in an urban environment. Some very high-tech stuff that'll hopefully help us understand a lot more about bears. This is an example. This is an adult female bear in the Aspen area, and you can see in pink the city limits of Aspen, and all those red dots are 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes that signal puts out a little red dot. So that's what that bear is doing, and you can see some usage in the community and some usage in the hillsides. This is actually a track on an adult male bear. You can see a lot of usage inside of Aspen, but then all of a sudden the bear decides to take a little trip, takes a journey quite a bit west, across Snowmass Village and west, and so watching some of those movements. This is a sub-adult young female that was in the Aspen area, and you can see a little walkabout there into, looks like probably Difficult Creek and some of those places, and some of the campgrounds in that area, wandering through and using much more of the natural environment than the in-town environment. This is a sub-adult male that used virtually all of his time in the community. In fact, you can't see Aspen under all those red dots, and so we were able to track that. And we can get a lot closer. We can go down a lot more towards that and actually look at, like I said, block by block where these bears are visiting and understand a lot more about it. So those are some of the things that we're going with that. This is 731, an adult male bear that was tagged and relocated for nuisance issues, but he was also collared so we could monitor him a little bit. And what happens is it starts out with that collar, and you can see over kind of Newcastle area, there's a little dot there where probably stopped to gas up while they were transporting that bear, but the bear was then taken south of the Newcastle area and released. And for about a day, that bear wandered around in that environment, but then immediately headed right back towards Glenwood Springs. You can see that bear making a beeline. I mean, it's not a lot of stopping to look for other stuff. It's a bear that's going back to where it needed to go. Spend some time in South Canyon. That's a Garfield County dump there, by the way, where it spent some time, and then returned to the Glenwood Springs area where it started causing nuisance problems again. That was a bear that was put down under the division's two-strike policy because it just could not, for whatever reason, figure out how to live in that environment. So those are some of the things that are going on, some of the research that the Colorado Division of Wildlife is working on along with Colorado State University and the National Wildlife Research Center. Those are some of the things that we're up to in terms of bears. We want to make sure that people have as much information as possible to help us with that situation. If you have questions about black bears, want a presentation for a homeowners group or a school group, anything like that, you can contact the Colorado Division of Wildlife. Our website address is on your screen. You can certainly call the local Division of Wildlife office, talk with those folks about what you may need to have in order to help us protect Colorado's black bears. So those are hopefully some ideas that you can use, some information that you can use to make yourself more bear aware. I'm Randy Hampton with the Colorado Division of Wildlife. I'd like to extend a thank you once again to everybody for tuning in today. If you have additional questions, don't hesitate to contact us at any time. And thank you very much for helping keep Colorado wild.